the layer of icy snow that was about that deep underneath it. So it's nice anyway to see a bunch of faces and have good interaction. So glad you're here. Let me share my screen here and get that going. There we go. That's interesting that it did that now with all of your pictures. Okay. I like to see you guys, and it just hit you all. There we go. So, right. I'm sorry, I'm still struggling with Zoom a little bit here. There we go. All right, so I can see you, I can see my slides. Those are both pretty helpful things. So awareness to act. I'll get into why I care about this and what this is here in just a minute. Let me just do the rest of the introduction. Gosh, there's a picture of me. This is just the benefit of being a speaker. You get a huge picture of yourself on the screen. Professional Scrum trainer. My background actually is in business analysis. So I have my CBAP there from the IIBA. And I'll tell you a few stories as we're going along here about some places that I've gotten to do some things like that. My Agile background actually starts probably a good 14 years ago. I was introduced to a few extreme programming practices. And then when I joined the company that has become Insight Digital Innovation about 13 years ago, shortly after that, I was invited to join a Scrum team, which I was like, what's that? Tell me more. And walked onto there and started to, have a headache about where my requirements document was and all that good stuff. It was, it struck me just very quickly, like within 2 sprints, I was completely sold on it because I found what I cared about as a business analyst so much was that we were providing something valuable to the people that we were working with, that we were actually delivering, in this case, software that was meeting the needs of our customers, that changed at least their work lives and made that a little bit better. And then I saw in the Scrum team where we were sitting down with our customers every 2 weeks in that case, oh my goodness, we were making a big difference. And when we weren't, we knew it quickly and we pivoted. I was like, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. This is amazing. I mean, I still had headaches and so on trying to figure a lot of things out, but it was really good. I was definitely sold. And I said, I don't want to go back, and I haven't. So since that time, that was a J&J company here in Cincinnati. And since that time, I've done Scrum Master work at a number of other places, financial institutions, Kroger, also PNC Insurance Company, and been an Agile coach several places as well. And now have taken on the mantle of being the national lead for Agile at Insight Digital Innovation. And we've got a broad range of things that we do, but historically it's a hardware and software company. And the digital innovation part is custom software development. So naturally, we've got a pretty good fit there from an Agile perspective. So happy to be part of digital innovation, definitely. And you can see a couple other things down there. I've got a lot of banners of assessments and certifications. I've actually just added one today, which my wife's like, great, more letters after your name. But I just passed the PSPO2 today, which was after taking an amazing advanced product owner class. Also on the side, personal time there, husband, 25 years, will be married this year, and father to 2 adopted kids from Guatemala. They are now teenage boys. Please pray for us. Okay, no, they're actually very good kids. They're still teenagers, but they're very good kids. And they shoveled today more than I did. Yes, it's possible. Also a musician and a worship leader at my church. And if I took you on a tour around my room, you'd see my son's drum set, his electronic drum set, several guitars, and a whole bunch of other interesting instruments right here in the room with me that I play when I go on breaks from meetings. So just a little bit about Insight, the only advertisement in here, just briefly. This is why my company pays me to be here. So anyway, but we help our clients seek out and deliver value in the midst of uncertain things and complexity. And that's really what our heart is to try and help our clients find valuable solutions in the midst of those things. And some of the things we just have right at our core here is, in addition to breadth of offerings, depth of experience, as we strive to meet the companies and the people that we work with where they're at. and help you find where you're going to go next. And the thing that really is just absolutely core is that we feel like everything we can do, we can teach the people we're working with how to do it. So not just, get us embedded so we can keep doing it, but actually it's your agility. And that's really at our heart. So yeah, obviously, if you want to talk any more about that, you've got 3 of us on here, and we'll happily talk to you about that. I'm like the product owner for Agile offerings, so you're going to have to beat me back with a stick if you start talking about those things. But I'll happily talk to you about that. No question about it. Question for you before we go any further, just for context for me, if everybody wouldn't mind just putting into the chat, like what's your current role or roles? Kind of like what's your perspective? Where are you coming at this from? That'll help me understand maybe where we can steer the conversation a little bit, and I can throw in some tidbits that might be relevant to you. So if you wouldn't mind putting in chat what your role is, Agile coach, Scrum master, or professional coach, like I heard Kara talking about, or whatever it might be. Yeah, personal Kanban, I agree, Doug. Coaching, product manager, okay. Engineer, project manager, Agile strategist. Ooh, I haven't seen that one before. Cool. UX, yep. Cool. All right, quite rather a mix. A lot of you are, not surprising given the name of the meetup, a lot of you are in Agile, in Scrum Master, Agile Coach, but definitely got some others as well. That's great. All right, so I always look for that because we're going to have a good discussion because we have diverse experiences and perspectives here. So I'm really interested to see how that affects our conversation going forward here. So let me give you a little background on why I got to the spot of kind of putting this together, awareness to act, how we got here. And the story for me here is that I started coaching. I actually started Scrum Mastering at a pretty decent sized regional bank that was not very agile, if I can put it very kindly. They were struggling to start, and they started up a Scrum team. I started working with them, and got them from zero, basically moving up, and they were doing pretty good actually. After several sprints, they were delivering some good valuable stuff, well connected with their customers and through their product owner, and yeah, the company was pretty satisfied with the investment that they'd made in the team based on the value that they were getting out of the product. And then it's like we hit a wall, and I was really struggling as a coach. Like, wow, we've been doing some great things. I like, for the first time at any team there at the company, they had somebody who was from the QA group working side by side with developers every day. I mean, that was like shocking to them, basically, that we could do that. And it was producing really good results. But it just, like, the team kind of stopped maturing. And I knew it in my gut, and I didn't really want to see it, but it was there. I could definitely tell. And the way that I work is I have this like toolbox that I have with me kind of mentally of things that I do and that I like to do. And most of the things in my toolbox, my Scrum Master Agile Coach toolbox, are related to facilitation techniques because I just love facilitation. So liberating structures is my jam. I mean, I love that stuff. And so I saw this problem and I decided, well, certainly I just need, I've been trying this hammer over here and it's not working. So let me go get a screwdriver. I'll go get another facilitation technique, another tool to add to my toolbox. Or maybe I need a saw or something like that. And again, it took me a little while to realize, but it just wasn't effective. It just wasn't producing results. The team was still stalled. And to make matters worse, I was mentoring a new Scrum Master, somebody from the team, who definitely, showed a lot of interest and mindset that was appropriate for Agile. It was great. So I was mentoring him through that. But I don't know if you've ever done that, but it really reveals a lot of the challenges. You can't really hide when you're mentoring somebody. You can't really hide when something's not going well. Like, that's part of why you're mentoring them, is because this is real life stuff. So it was one of those things I couldn't really escape. And it was actually something I saw I had a bit of a shortcoming on. I was like, I don't know what to do about this. I was trying to have an influence, and it just wasn't landing. It wasn't resonating. The team stayed right where they were at, which wasn't bad, but it just wasn't. It wasn't where I knew that it was possible for them to get. And the Scrum Master wasn't really learning what they needed to learn in my mentoring because of it. So I started to wonder what the heck was going on. And as I am wont to do, I started to think about it in a very principled way. Mike is like, yes. Mark is so principled, sometimes it's frustrating. But anyway, I started to think about it in a very principled way. Let me put my little visual up on the screen there. We can see me and the slides. And I kind of came to the realization that I had three major problems, basically, three things that were not going quite well for me in this particular situation. And the first one was I had an awareness problem. And that awareness problem was that I was only seeing what I was looking for. Like I walked into team events and interactions and kind of, I was doing that like, oh, there Bob goes again, kind of know why he's doing that, or oh, Mary's not here. I know why that's happening. And just feeling like I knew what was already going on, so I was looking for it. And that was also my analysis problem, is that I assumed I knew why things were happening and what was important. So I kind of was approaching things like I already knew it. And that's not too helpful from a leadership perspective. It's just the little punch that we're going to get to here in a little bit. So I felt like I already knew what was going on. I felt like I knew why it was going on. And when I walked into situations, I saw what I was looking for, if I can put it that way. And so that's how I got the team as far as that I was able to help them get to, was because I had experience. So those things weren't all bad, but it was now handicapping me basically from going any further. Now, my third problem was an action problem, and that I was using, as I described, the tools and techniques I was comfortable with. So I like facilitation techniques, so I'm going to keep pulling facilitation techniques out of my bag, right? And some of them were a little valuable, but it was kind of like that little sprout of, you plant a seed, a little sprout comes up, and then it just like withers away. That was kind of the effect of the facilitation techniques I was using. Interesting, seemed like a good session. Next week, it didn't matter if I'd done it or not. So I wasn't being very effective, to put it mildly. And from a like leadership or influence perspective, I was not having much influence in the situation. So I really just felt stuck, is probably the best word for it. And it was painfully obvious because I was mentoring somebody. I couldn't escape it. So these things on the left impeded my influence. And I have a theory that is stronger than just a theory, probably, because what we're about to go through here that I was discovering, and I don't want to make it sound like I discovered this all myself. I certainly didn't. All the stuff you're going to see here is built in community and has been refined in community. So this was a good 3 years ago that all that started. And what I've discovered, what my theory was that I've discovered seems to be holding true, is that the things on the left are very common for many of us. These are common problems that we have. That we walk into situations and we see what we're looking for. That we feel like we already know stuff, especially if we've been a team for a while, or the more experienced we are, we just feel like we know what's already going on, or we pick up the tools that we're comfortable with, and those are the ones we want to use. We're kind of biased toward those. So that seems to be a common experience. What I've also discovered then is that there's a common kind of approach that shifts. So the way that we want to do this is to shift over to enabling influence. So for awareness, instead of only seeing what we're looking for, to become more influential, more impactful, we want to observe what's really happening. Like, can I get a perspective that's not just what I came in walking in the room with, right? Can I see some things that are really happening? Or as I like to say, can I be surprised by something? That means that I'm actually looking at what is going on. And then for analysis, can I openly consider my interpretations? Is it possible that I could be more open about that? Because what I have on the left there is a fairly closed analysis, right? I'm not really looking for anything new. I assume I know it already. And from an action perspective, I want to select the most impactful actions, not just the ones that I'm comfortable with. And even more so, I realize that these things build on each other. Like if I do awareness well, like it says, observing what's really happening, it really unlocks my ability to analyze openly and consider my interpretations openly, which really unlocks my ability to select the most impactful actions. So it really, it flows like so. And that's what I just described to you on the right there is really the core. It's kind of the structure, the thinking scaffold, as I like to call it, of awareness to action. Awareness to act is on the right side there. We want to observe what's really happening from an awareness perspective so we can openly consider our interpretations and analysis and then select the most impactful actions. And I don't, if you're like most of the people I've talked to about this, you're looking at the things on the right and probably going, that seems very logical. And maybe even some of you are saying, duh, Mark. That's possible. I won't put words in your mouth, but there's nothing like earth shattering on the right side there. Of course, we want to select the most impactful actions. But here's the thing. The stuff on the right's hard. And again, for me and what I've discovered for most of the people I'm working with, it's not our default mode. It's not really what we typically do. Like there's a reason we're on the left side is because, and there's a reason I was stuck there is because that's kind of our default mode. More coffee. I need more coffee. But it's our default mode, or the way that the drawing on the screen is starting to kind of suggest to you is it's the way we're wired. It's the way our brains are wired. So I want to be really clear and respectful to all of us as well to say, like, the stuff on the left isn't bad. I'm not calling it bad. And the stuff on the right isn't just good. What I'm saying is the stuff on the left may not be the best for us to use in every situation. And what I'd like to do with you tonight, if you'll go with me, is explore things on the right so that you can consider when stepping over onto the right side of this is most effective. But there's still going to be lots of situations, probably even the majority, where you're going to need to be on the left side. And let me just give you an example here. I mean, our brains are wired to quickly go from input to analysis to action, just like that, unconsciously. We're not thinking about it. It just happens, right? It happens to us all the time. And that's a good thing. There's a reason that's our default mode, right? If a bear was charging at you, this is no time for you to observe what's really happening and wonder, what's the wind speed and direction, right? And gosh, look at the fur on that bear. I wonder how long the claws are. I mean, this is the time where you want your body to just gut react. A bear's charging me, I gonna run. I mean, that's I don't want to think about it or analyze it. Let's just do it. That's important and it's good. And of course, I'm giving you an extreme example on the left side, but it's still true in many of our interactions. And when we're trying to influence people, we're going to want to seriously consider things on the right side. But because we're wired for stuff on the left by default, it's going to be hard to be over there. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to be on the right side. I really want to make sure that we're clear about that. This is going to feel difficult to all of us. It still does to me, and I'm working at it, but it gets faster, it gets better. But it definitely is still, it's going to feel slow. And for those of you who have read anything like fast thinking, slow thinking, you're probably making some connections right now. That's exactly the area I'm playing in right now, that there's fast thinking and there's slow thinking. And fast thinking is more like the stuff on the left, and slow thinking is more like the stuff on the right. If you haven't read that, I recommend it to you, but you don't have to know it to get where we're going here. I'm just saying we're going to need to kind of slow down and invest in the stuff on the right a bit, in cases where we're finding that our influence is stuck, or where we need to see a fresh perspective. So hopefully I've made it sound hard, because that was my intent, but we got some work ahead of us. It's not always going to stay slow. That was the other thing I'm going to say. So it's not for every situation. It's also doesn't always have to stay as slow as I'm going to describe it to you, but it will start there, because what we're talking about on the right side is building a new set of muscles. It's almost like having a different set of core muscles. I don't know if any of you have ever, hurt anything in your torso. Like, I broke my collarbone several years ago, and just last week I hurt my lower back shoveling ice, which doesn't work because it's ice, not snow. Anyway, my back reminded me of that. But that, and if you've ever done that, you recognize how critical those core muscles are to your ability to do just about anything. Because, like, I broke my collarbone, I'm like, well, I just won't use my right arm for a while. And the rest of my body said, or stand up, or lean over, I mean, there's like, it's connected to everything. And that's what we're talking about on the right side. For us to do this, we have to build a second set of core muscles, and we're gonna have to be very intentional about it. So if I made it sound hard, let's go to the benefits. Why bother doing all that really difficult stuff? What's in it for you? What you get out of shifting over to the right side is you get deeper insight into situations. I'm not just saying that it's because it's my company's name, and I did not get a quarter for saying that. But you get to see more of what's going on, and I cannot tell you how important that is when you're trying to build trust and you're trying to have influence. Just simply having insight and reflecting things that you've observed that most people just aren't seeing is amazing for trust building. When you go like, I noticed this was happening, and they're like, what, you did? It's huge. And it builds connection and trust, which is what I was just saying. So if you're trying to understand what's going on, if you are really deeply aware of things, people recognize that, and it meets one of our deepest needs, which is connection, and that can build trust. Additionally, it increases the impact of your interactions, because then you're able to bring that insight and awareness to bear in better actions that you're picking, basically. It supports teaching and mentoring. Let me pause just a little longer on this one to say, this is really what shoved me in this direction. In addition to the pain that I was having with the team where we were stuck, the fact I was mentoring a Scrum Master and trying to help him learn Scrum Mastery stuff in the midst of being stuck with a team, the things you're about to see are tremendous tools for teaching and mentoring just about anything. And we use them at Insight to help our Scrum Masters, our Agilists, as they're learning, as they're growing in things. They're saying, let's use this as a way for you to really become aware of what's going on. And I'll give you some examples of that as we're going throughout the material here. But it's really a strong way of teaching and mentoring somebody, and as well, yourself. It reveals empirical evidence. We're Agilists, so we should really get into this whole empirical thing, right? Where we're basing things off of data and not just guesses or feelings, but actually reality of what's happened. But what I find so often, I'll throw this stone at myself first here, that is when as an Agile coach, that I have had a tendency to go off of gut a lot, which is the opposite of empiricism. Instead of saying, here is the backlog of challenges that I'm seeing because of this data, I see that these are our challenges. And here are the experiments I'm going to run to try and affect that. And then I'm going to loop back and see how effective that's been. And I'm going to take that data and feed it into my next set of experiments. Very empirical. And yet I wasn't doing it. I wasn't eating my own dog food or practicing what I was preaching. And the things that we're going to go through here enable you to do that. If you go from awareness to analysis to action, in a way that you can loop back to awareness and do that all over again based on your actions, then you're building your empirical evidence as a Agilist, really. So very strong there. Good stuff for us to do with our integrity. And it enables continuous improvement, where you can see that we're having an effect or not, and then adjusting it. So it's very agile from that perspective as well. All this stuff that we're talking about here in these three stages of awareness, analysis, and action, there's a canvas for each of those three steps. You'll see it all on the screen. However, if you want it in a PDF form that you can print out or fill in or whatever, it's available as that tool. It's just the canvases. I want to be clear about that. Feel free to email me. My email address is there. I can send it to you, or you can go to awareness2act.com and I'll have you fill out some information and you can get the PDF that way. So that is available to you as well. So before we go any further, and actually let me give you the map of where we're going here, because there's the three stages. I want to describe that to you and give you a chance to kind of react or ask questions before we get into any of the three steps here. But I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time in awareness, because I find that that's where we often have the most challenge starting. And I also find where we get the most benefit of investing our time. Like I said, where we see people unlocking their awareness, it tends to naturally lead to better analysis and action. That's not to say that investment in those isn't necessary or helpful. It's just to say that's where we're going to start, because that's where we have our biggest problem usually. And then we'll spend a little time in analysis, and I'll probably be flying through action, because in my experience, we're pretty good at picking actions. We just need to have better input on how we filter down which actions we select. So that's usually how this goes, but I'll also let you all steer me based on your questions and and what you're interested most in. So let me pause there for a second. And you can unmute or put into chat if you got a question or a reaction or something you want to talk about here before we start going through awareness. And I take a long pause with a drink of water.
Hey, Mark, would you think that this is something that somebody could look at your workbook and just kind of understand and go with? Or is it something that often, needs to be kind of taught in a class or watch, somebody coach?
Yeah. It's a great question. Yeah. So the workbook itself or the canvases are not self-explanatory. I haven't have done the work to write that up, to be honest with you. So what you're going to get in that is just literally the canvases. You would need something like what we're talking through tonight to do that. So that's where I usually point people to things like, and this is going to be posted on YouTube. I probably point them to something like that, or the other webinars that I've done to get that kind of explanation. We're also, I mean, that you can certainly pick it up from that. It is not rocket science. It's just not common sense, I guess is what I would say, based on my experience. That being said, I cannot strongly recommend enough learning about this in community, because doing this stuff with other people, as I'll point out several times in here, is the best way to raise your awareness and to really kind of get you need outside perspective is what it comes down to work through this. So I certainly can sell you something from Insight to do that, but I'm also saying, like, if you were to just pick up a recording of this or watch, you're here tonight, and get the canvas, if you were to pair up with somebody and do that, you'd probably find it provides a lot of value to you. We are putting together, we've already run a trial run of a cohort, basically, where we run it for several weeks and go through this in a lot slower pace, basically, and then just take it chunk by chunk, and you get that instruction and interaction and so on, and then go off and do it, and then come back and reflect on the experience and what was challenging, what was helpful, and then refine it a little more, and then add layers on top of it. So that's what we're building, because that's been the best experience. When after I mentored that Scrum Master at that bank, what we did is we were after that tasked with, they said, you did such a good job there. Why don't you train all of our Scrum Masters who aren't Scrum Masters right now? So raise up brand new Scrum Masters. And so we created a 4-week boot camp, and the first version of this in a formal sense was built for that 4-week class, where they went through a cycle like that for 4 weeks. So yeah, we're basically creating a more focused version of that. Did that answer your question, Doug? I gave like 3 answers to it, so
Yes,
I hope one of them was.
absolutely. Well, thank you. But great to hear about, working with a community and how that really helps to
Yeah,
learn better.
yeah, I love community. All right, if anybody has any questions as we're going along, I do have chat up right in front of me. I can't see all of your pictures on the screen, but if you put it in chat or you unmute or something, definitely I will see that. We can stop and go there. So let me lay out the problem of awareness. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. We don't usually realize it, but we walk into pretty much every situation that we're entering into, whether it's virtual or in person, with these lovely things called assumptions and conclusions. And I've drawn them as bricks on purpose because they're kind of heavy, but we don't realize that those are the constructs we're walking into. I described some of them a little earlier, like, oh boy, there goes Bob again, right? You kind of like know that, or you see 2 people on the corner talking, you're like, oh, Taryn and Sarah are best friends. That's just how it goes. Or I bet they're, I bet Sarish is mad about what happened yesterday still, and that's why he's, doing that over in the corner, he's pouting or whatever. We kind of walk in with these assumptions and conclusions, and I've just given you some relatively trivial ones that are still pretty impactful. The challenge is, the biggest challenge for us is that these assumptions and conclusions that we walk into situations with are really important to us, and they're subconscious. I can't even talk right now. Subconscious and non-intentional. Okay, rebooting mouth. Anyway, they're very important to us because quite often they're tied to something that we deeply value. I'll just speak for myself here and own this, right? Walking at that bank, walking into the team's conversations and situations, I was confident I knew what was going on, and that was important to me. That was some of the assumptions and conclusions were built off of that, that I had to have confidence in knowing what was actually happening and what was wrong. That was starting to be torn down because it wasn't having an effect, but I had to be confident of those things, you see, because I had to make sure that I was showing I was valuable to the organization and to the team. And I needed the respect in order to have the influence. And so I put a lot of weight on top of this. And so I needed to make sure that those things were true, that I really knew what was going on. And as I said, eventually I was forced into the corner and had to have the humility to recognize I didn't know everything that was going on. But when we walk in with those assumptions and conclusions to a situation, they have to be true. So often they have to be true. Again, we don't even realize it, but this assumption I make or this conclusion I've already drawn, it's got to be true. It has to, because of reasons, right? Because of my values that are important, because of how I'm perceived, because that's the way that I show that I know what I'm doing. And when we walk in with those types of things, we end up in the situations that we're in trying to find evidence to prop those things up, to support those. That's what we end up looking at. And I'm not saying the data is not there to support assumptions and conclusions. I actually I was very depressed as a teenager, and I actually learned something through that, and that is that I could find evidence to support whatever conclusion I came to. If I thought the world sucked, I could find tons of evidence showing me that all over the place. It's just, you probably know some examples, like as soon as you buy a new car, suddenly you see that same car everywhere, right? It's almost like you're wired for it. And yes, I'm sure a lot of you are making connections here with biases. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Cognitive distortions, whatever. I mean, we're playing in that territory, definitely. But this is what I was walking into those situations with, was a lot of conclusions that needed to be true. And so therefore I found evidence to support them. So I was finding data, I was filtering data out, and I was also twisting some data in order to support my conclusions. And then I had my blinders on. There was a lot of stuff I just wasn't looking at because I didn't want to see it, because I didn't happen to see it because I was so focused on things that were important to support my conclusions, or I was filtering them out because it didn't support my conclusions. So the deal is, we're really bad at seeing things we aren't looking for. We're getting tons of input all the time. It's really a lot easier to just see things we're looking for. And that's part of the reason this is so hard. This awareness problem, though, means that I'm blinded to a lot of things. See all the stuff on the side that I'm missing, and see how I'm distorting some of this stuff into evidence? That means I'm not really seeing what's going on. Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy, that's a good way to put it. Yep. And this means we're not really aware of some things that really could help us and help our teams, right? And help us have more influence and effect in the situations that we're in. And I don't want to, also, I'm trying to be respectful here, I don't want to call all assumptions and conclusions bad. Again, we're wired for this stuff for a reason. But let me just put it in context with this quote from Isaac Asimov that I absolutely love. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in. It's like we're building this kind of set of stuff that we're looking at the world through, but the more assumptions and conclusions we have, the less we're actually seeing through those things. And every once in a while, you have to at least, I would say, at least set them aside for a minute and see what's actually going on aside from those assumptions and conclusions. That's really what I'm recommending for you to do here, is to find ways to set them aside temporarily so that you can be more aware of what's happening. I would love to say that I'm just going to walk in, tomorrow and suddenly not have any assumptions and conclusions and see everything. But it takes work, and I'm always going to have some of those. What I'm suggesting, at least as a first step, is to say, can you tell them to go hold their breath in the corner for a few minutes while you become more aware of what's happening? And I say that in a kind of funny way to help you remember it. But the reality is, when we get to analysis, you tell them to come back, but you're going to look at them in a different way once you've done that. So we'll see how that happens. So just tell them to go hold their breath in the corner for a minute here. Okay, so I told you I was very principled and all that stuff theoretical. That's what we've done so far. Some of you are probably going, when are we going to get to practical stuff? So let's start heading in that direction. What do I mean about actually being aware of what's going on in a room? A word we could use for this is observation, or some people would have said reading the room when we were in person. How can you be aware of what's actually taking place in a room? And part of this is observing some different stuff than we used to. if I can put it that way. Some things that we can observe, that we can be highly aware of and very intently focused on, that will help us become more aware, are things like what's said, the actual words that are said, the volume that they're said at, the tone of voice that they're spoken in, what's not said. A little harder, but you can actually observe it. You can observe body language. Again, right now we're probably looking about this kind of body language just from here or around here, so it's more difficult to observe fully what's going on virtually. No question about it. Expressions, lack of expression, spacing, again, in person. I put this in person just because of that team I was working with, because I distinctly remember that I walked into a daily Scrum once and there was a new person who had joined who was literally standing in the shadow of their superior in the room. Like, I kind of had to go squint and look for them across the room because they were standing literally 2 steps back and just kind of tucked in behind the other person. That's spacing, which again, virtually is different, to be sure. But these types of things, these things we can observe, actually is the key to us being aware. It's hard to do this. So let's practice it. And we're going to do it in a fun way. And this is where we're going to get into Mural. So I just put into chat a Mural. If you have Chrome, I strongly recommend you use that to open the Mural. You can use it in other web browsers. The only two I would say, please don't try this because they ain't friends, is Safari. I don't know why, but Safari and Mural don't like each other, and Internet Explorer and Mural are not friends either. But all the other browsers, good. Chrome is probably the cleanest, and I'll stop sharing my screen because you don't need to be looking at my screen right now. It's not going to help you. All right, so a lot of you are getting into Mural. What we're going to do once you get into Mural is we're going to watch a video, and I've actually put the link to the video in the Mural instead of trying to go through showing you a video in Zoom, which sometimes the audio doesn't come through. Just like, forget it. I'm just going to give you a link to YouTube in the Mural here, and you can click on it and watch it. It's only about a minute. For those of you who know Big Bang Theory, it's from Big Bang Theory. You don't have to know Big Bang Theory to watch this video at all. So don't worry if you do or don't know that. In fact, it might help you if you don't. I'll be honest. In this exercise, it might be better if you don't know, but who knows? We'll find that out together. All right, so I see quite a few of you in here. So I'm going to unhide the section with the video on it over here. What I want you to do is once you watch the video, I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Just take note of 2 things that you see, those observations we were just talking about. Just observe 2 things about this 1-minute video, okay? So I'll draw you over to it here. Summon everybody, magical superpowers, there you go. And you can either double click on Sheldon's face there, or if you just hover over this area, you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, in the black box, you'll see an open button appears, and you can just click on that. It'll open YouTube right there in your browser. So just make sure you're muted. I'll give you a minute to watch that. Observe 2 things. Just write them down, and we'll do something with them here in a minute. If you're having any trouble with any of those instructions, let me know. I'll happily help you. Okay, everybody should have finished or be very close to it. Again, make sure you've noted 2 observations from their interaction. All right, next up, I'm going to draw you to the next section of the mural here. Summon you over there with my magical superpowers. Just double click to add a sticky note and add your observations 1 per sticky note in this area here. I always love this, what people notice. But I can't tell you how many times I've watched the video and I haven't noticed some of these things. So many pillows. Hmm. All right. People are still adding. Keep at it. Don't let me stop you. I'm just gonna take a spin through some of these here. Sheldon is very concerned about the milk. Yeah. The room's a mess. So many pillows. A lot of distance between people. Sheldon doesn't want to eat in her apartment. It's very colorful. And someone else says she likes purple and organization. Sheldon's agitated. There's some wine bottles by the sink. Sarcasm. The apartment's a mess. He needs a bowl. She makes a lot of faces that show dislike. Penny's relaxed. Sheldon's not. Sheldon's body language is protective. Yep. He's annoying. Have you met Sheldon? Okay. Good. All right. So let's we'll come back to those. We're not going to throw those away. We're going to use those here in just a minute, but let me go ahead and share my screen again. Get my screen share going again. So come on back to the Zoom meeting here and we'll head into awareness polluters. So we've just talked a little bit about what you can observe. And what we're going to try and do is talk about, or we're going to try and do, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to talk about what things can pollute our awareness so that we can get to the point of clean observations. So there's some things that can mess up what we're aware of, what we're looking at, that we don't even realize. And that's what we can hopefully become more aware of here so we can clean some of these things up. So there are 4 pretty common polluters that I'm going to describe for you. One of them is inside view. Another is called connecting cause. The third one is evaluation. And the fourth one is exaggeration. So let's take a quick spin through these 4 polluters. The first, inside view, assumes things that are inside of someone that are not directly observable. Very common for all of us to do this. And again, we're kind of wired to do it, right? This is part of how our brains are made. We see people's faces, we see their expressions, we hear their tone of voice. Our brains are made to go figure out what that means and then act on it. So it's not a bad thing. It's just that it's not something we can actually observe. We're confusing the conclusion that we've drawn from what we've observed. And for us to really be aware of what's going on, we want to see that those things are separate and just for a moment here, put our assumptions and conclusions to go hold their breath and just look at what we can observe. So we can't see things that are inside of someone. And these are things like thoughts and emotions, stuff that's in our brains, stuff that's in our hearts, if you will. We can't actually observe thoughts and emotions. So here's an example of a polluted observation. Manesh was angry with Sharon. I can't actually observe angry. I can't observe angry. I can observe things that Manesh has done that I usually would make strong connections with anger. But unless Manesh actually says, I'm angry, I don't know for sure that he's angry. So I can just right over there and Manesh is angry, but it's possible he's not. And again, if I'm stuck, this is a way to get better perspective, is to set that aside for a minute and say what I observed was. So what are some things that Manesh could be doing that would lead me to believe he was angry? What could I be observing? What are some of your ideas? What are some things Manesh would be doing that I might have observed when I was writing down Manesh was angry? What are some things you see when see somebody do when you're thinking they're angry?
But they tense up, right?
You could, yeah, tense up. You might see like a shoulder raised, perhaps. Sulking, self-isolating, John says in chat, yeah.
Tone of voice.
Tone of voice, get much sharper, louder, yeah.
But are you seeing that? That's hearing.
Seeing and hearing. You can observe, though, that their voice is louder than it was before. That's actually observable, yeah. Quickly responding, hand gestures, posture, pounding fist on table. Those are things that you can actually observe took place. So those would be more like what we would call clean observations. And let me just unpack a little bit, just for transparency's sake, the things that we're talking about here. Yes, they're like bias. We're back in bias territory, and that kind of stuff. We're back talking about biases. We're also kind of dealing with maybe like behavioral science kind of stuff. Like really, if you want to take this to the extreme, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you want to take this to the extreme, the direction we're heading in is very much like a behavioral science observation, where you're just observing what you can cleanly observe. By the way, I've tried going that far. It is not helpful to go that far over, okay? We're trying to clean up, though. We're trying to head more in that direction, because where we typically start at with just snapping to Manesh was angry with Sharon usually leads us into trouble when we're trying to influence situations. When we're stuck, these are some of the reasons for it. All right, let's look at another polluter. Connecting cause. Assumes cause connections, causal relationships between observed actions. And the word that you usually use when you've got this is the word because. So maybe an observation of Manesh raised his voice. That was cleaner because Sharon shook her head. And again, unless Manesh actually explicitly said that's why he raised his voice, I don't know for sure that's why he raised his voice. I can't observe the connection. The causal relationship between those things is an assumption or conclusion that I'm making, that I want to go to hold its breath for a few minutes here while I'm doing clean observation. So what could I observe about this? I could observe the time relationship between these two things, though, that Sharon shook her head and then Manesh raised his voice. That is clean. That is true. Next one is evaluation. It judges an observed action. So the judging is the key here, and a label is usually how we see it. And labels are things like good and bad and too much or too little, or those kinds of things. So Manesh spoke too loudly that's not a clean observation. Too loudly for whom? Right? Manesh spoke loudly, or maybe when Manesh spoke loudly or raised his voice from, louder than he was speaking before, Sharon, after that, winced or moved away from him. Those are things I can observe, but too loudly is a judgment about how loud he was speaking that isn't really helping me observe something cleanly. And then exaggeration, over or understating what's been observed at the time. So always and hardly and never are very common examples of this one, or extreme examples of this one. Manesh always argues with Sharon. It turns out I'm not around every time Manesh and Sharon are there. And even if I was, it would be hard to imagine that they always argue, or never whatever, or hardly whatever. So it's unhelpful. We're injecting some things into it that are not actually observable. The way I like to put this that can help clarify things a little bit maybe is to say, when we have a clean observation, we have something that's provable in a court of law. So imagine, if you will, the things you write down as observations. Imagine that you have the opposing attorney questioning you on the stand about what you just said. Manesh was angry. Really? Can you prove it? Oh, well, I saw Manesh pounded his fist on the table. Okay, well, that's what you can testify. You're allowed to testify that. You're not allowed to testify the things that you're assuming are going on inside of somebody, or that you believe you understand the causal relationship between. That's the type of cleanliness we want to get to. Again, you can take it to an extreme, go behavioral science and so on. That's too far. But if we clean things up a little bit, we're starting to become aware of those assumptions and conclusions that we are reading onto or into what we're observing. Hopefully you can start to see play out what I was saying earlier, like this slows you down at first. This is a much slower way of becoming aware of things, because you're actually becoming aware of things instead of just reading your assumptions and conclusions onto things. Is actually very fast and easy, and we're very familiar with that, and that is good in many cases. But when we want to become more aware, we need to slow down. So let's just run a couple practice tests here. Awareness practice time. So I'm going to give you an observation, and then let's use chat here to vote on whether it's clean or whether it's polluted. And if it is polluted, which of these 4 pollutions is it? Okay, playing a little game here. I'll award points afterward for the winner, I guess. I don't know. Jose was annoyed with Shauna. Do you think that's clean, or do you think that's one of these 4 polluters? Okay, we've got pollution. Sue specifically saying polluted by evaluation. Okay, a lot of people are thinking polluted. Anybody have any other ideas what kind of pollution? Inside view, okay. Got a couple inside views there. This one is definitely arguable as far as which pollution, but it is definitely a pollution. We don't know for sure. We can't observe that Jose was annoyed with Shauna. We can observe some actions and so on about that. I tend to view this as an inside view, that like we understand what's happening inside of Jose. But again, I've had enough go rounds with this that you could call it evaluation. It's the point simply is that we're not observing that he's annoyed. We're observing some things that lead us to believe or conclude that he is annoyed. And so we're going to clean that up a little bit, maybe with something more like Jose rolled his eyes. Maybe even after Shauna spoke, Jose rolled his eyes. We could, do some sort of time relationship between the two. All right, let's try another here. Kayla mentioned the team working agreements twice. What do you think? Does that seem clean or one of the 4 polluters? Randy's in fast with the clean. All right, we have a building consensus for clean. And I agree with that one. That seems pretty clean. We can actually observe her referencing the working agreements, and we can observe it happening twice. So it's pretty clean. All right, last example here. April constantly interrupted everyone. Polluted, clean, and if it's polluted, which pollution? All right, we got several pollutions. Randy's saying exaggeration, a lot of yes, it is an exaggeration of an exaggeration. Interrupted in everyone seem like they're probably exaggerations anyway. We could probably say something cleaner like April interrupted Steve twice or something of that nature. Would be a little cleaner. All right, so let's apply this back to what you were doing back on the mural. And I'm going to ask you to categorize your observations on the mural. I'm going to stop sharing so you're not looking at my screen, but you're back on the mural with me. Over to the right of where we just were. Just zoom out a little bit, summon everybody there. Over to the right there, you can see we've got a section up at the top. I'm going to unhide my cursor so you can see where I'm pointing. Up here, we've got clean. So drag your sticky note over to clean if you feel like it's clean. If you can't figure it out, it goes into not sure. And if you feel like it's one of these 4 polluters, you can just drag it right on over, into whichever polluter you feel like it is down here at the bottom. Okay, so go ahead and just take a minute and drag your observations you had over to the right. Categorize them. And not sure is a perfectly fine answer, because we always end up with a few up there that are good conversations. So I see some of them wandering around here. Maybe there's one in not sure. Are there any that you're kind of chewing on, trying to figure out where they are at? you just want to talk through for a minute? Do you notice any patterns in the sticky notes that are out here? Where they've landed on the right side? You're a quiet group.
This-
The landing and evaluation.
A lot in evaluation. Yeah.
Some of the stickies are just simply facts.
Mhm.
And I think some of those are the ones that are in the clean. So, it's unclear what the meaning of them even is necessarily, but they are simply facts.
That's a really good point. Yeah. They're kind of boring, aren't they? The ones that are up in the clean category. You're like, yeah, okay. They're just facts. I don't think anyone's put it quite that way before. That is really clear and brief. Yeah, very concise. They're just facts. That's what we're aiming for. Just the facts, just the
I
facts.
used to manage deployments at a bank. I recommended that anybody who sent out the follow-up email only put facts in the email. So you couldn't say, people worked really slow last night and it went live at 1:02 a.m. You could say,
Right.
it went live at 1:02 a.m. Whatever, it went live.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The thing that we're really trying to get to is get to just those facts, because those are the things that actually happen, right? That's the perspective we're trying to get. And then we can pick up our analysis after that on these facts and pull them back in our assumptions and conclusions and handle them a little differently and consider other possibilities. But the problem is when we do that all at once and we jumble it all together in our fast thinking way, then we rush into these assumptions and conclusions, and usually we're just supporting the things that we already believe are true. And that's not really helping us get the fresh perspective where we need to get in order to influence effectively. All right, very common, by the way, that we end up with a lot of things up and down in the polluted area. That's the way this goes. That's why we're doing this, exactly why we're doing this. Okay, oh, I see, I was missing the chat here while I was looking at that. Oh, and absolutely, I can share for the recording. So let's take a quick look here what we've got. The video observations while we're talking about he needs a bowl. Let's see, that's right over here. He needs a bowl. And Sheldon is very concerned about the milk. So let's talk about that one for a little bit. How does that feel to you? Does that feel clean? Does that feel like it's got one of our polluters? Mike, what was it that brought that to your attention?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it, and he definitely expressed concern for the milk. The way he reacted when she said she was going in and borrowing it, and then going on about his experience about how someone thought he was crazy because the carton felt lighter, but he knew he was right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would like to say that he's definitely concerned by the way he's talking about it, and because I feel like he's expressing his feelings. It might not be so clean because it's very emotional, but I'm gonna say it is, just because it's him relaying his experience and his concern for her going into the apartment and taking the milk. So that's why I threw it in there.
Yeah, we're on that fuzzy edge, right? If we were in behavioral science, that wouldn't be clean enough.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to make our judgment call, basically, is are we cleaning enough of the pollution off that we're seeing fresh perspective? or not, because we could argue that, I mean, that isn't absolutely purely clean because of the word concerned that's there, right?
Yeah, and then to me, Mark, it's the use of the term very concerned.
That is
Yeah.
probably the easiest thing to clean up on there. Yep.
Yeah.
So we could definitely play with that one. This is where you're gonna have to use your best judgment. And I would say when you're first starting out, shove yourself as far as you can over into clean. So tell yourself that that's not good enough. Concerned is too much, but you're gonna find it's gonna bounce back to a spot where you're able to get good awareness and observation, and not have to, you know, get quite so clean on everything. You'll find the spots where it's important for you to clean things up. Let's keep moving because I don't want to only cover awareness tonight. We at least want to get a little into the next few things. But here's the canvas I've been telling you about. I'll just put up the whole slide here. This particular canvas is really, really simple. It's barely even a canvas, I would say. It's just got spots for you to write down your observations. But here's the deal. When you observe something, actually taking the act of writing it down or typing it up or whatever way, recording it in some way, enables you to inspect it. Just like you did with those sticky notes with Sheldon and Penny. Wow, I'm really having trouble tonight. This is very entertaining recording. You can't really inspect things that you don't make real. So take the time, write them down, type them up, get them out of here, and make them real enough that you can look at them and go like, oh yeah, that's not actually that clean, is it? So otherwise, you will assume it's clean. And I already said, you know, capture things like they're provable in a court of law, or like a video recording would, or an audio recording would. Would a video recording capture annoyed? It would capture the actions, right, that someone does that you could see, or the sounds that someone makes, those kinds of things. So that's what you're aiming for. And in the canvas, it's got some prompts over here, some things to be aware of. By the way, I've seen this, of course, I created it in the sense of an Agile team, a Scrum team specifically, and a Scrum Master or any other kind of leader really working with that team, whether they're on the team, whether they're, you know, a manager of the team, whatever it is, you can really use this that way. But as I've been speaking about this in various places, I'm getting a lot of interest from places that are far outside of the original context. Product owners who are going, oh, I can use this with my stakeholders. This is great. Okay. Hadn't thought of that. Parents with their kids. Definitely hadn't thought of that one. There's a lot of different places you can use this same type of stuff. Anytime that you're working with human beings, as it turns out, a lot of this stuff is pretty helpful. So that's the first step. In each of these awareness analysis action, I've got a first step you can take, and that's what it just was that we practiced. But there's some other things you can do too. For example, focusing on one sense. You can just, and this is a little, actually, this is one that's easier virtually than in person, but you could turn off your video and just listen, or turn away from the screen and just listen for a little while. You'll be surprised at what you're aware of that you weren't before because you only have input in one of your senses. Likewise, you can, you know, take off the earpiece or whatever, turn down the volume and just watch. And again, you're going to be surprised at what you become aware of. Confirmed observation, sometimes it helps to just, you know, I think I just saw this happening. Is that what's going on? Or pulling somebody aside and saying, I think this is what I saw. That can sometimes be an interesting thing to try out and see if you're observing what they're observing too. This is one of my favorites though, is to get somebody else to observe it. Either have somebody observe a context you're familiar with, or pair up. This is what we did with that first Scrum Master cohort. As I said, go off in pairs and spend half a day with the team. And don't compare notes until lunchtime. Then get together, eat lunch together, look at your notes. And it is very eye-opening. You're like, you saw what? I was sitting right there. How did I not see that? It's really a great way to learn. Compare your observations with somebody else's. By the way, if you're going to observe, it's probably best to state to people that's what you're doing, or to get their permission. Especially if you're familiar with them, they're going to think it's weird that you're just sitting there like, you know, doing this kind of thing, or creeping nearby. Don't be the creeper, please. Get permission. Let them know what's going on. All right, so we're headed to analysis. What do you do with all those things you observed? And I'm going to step on the gas pedal a little bit here, like I said. If you've got some good, clean observations, let's just assume we've done a really good job of that. Like I've told you, I'm not expecting that we aren't going to have any conclusions and assumptions, but using clean observation, we have at least set them aside. but they're going to come back in. The question for us now is, how do we handle them in a way that's helpful? Because we've separated them out of our observations, of our awareness. So we want to hold those. They're good information. It's just that we want to hold them differently. Where we held them before, like these bricks that we've got here that have to be true, that are very weighty, we want to hold them in a way that's much more open. And that's what's going to help us do our analysis better. And so we want to express them openly, just like we did with our observations. We want to express our assumptions and conclusions openly, because if we can't write them down, type them up, look at them, we can't inspect them, therefore we cannot adapt them. So make them transparent. Second, explore alternatives. What are some other possible truths, so to speak, possible conclusions or assumptions that could be true about this situation, and then consider the impacts and importance. And that's what we're going to see exists on the canvas. In this case, is a little more like your traditional canvas. So the first thing, and this seems like a trick, but I cannot tell you how important this is and how helpful this is. When you're writing down your initial assumptions, so you've gone off and done your observation, your awareness, and then you sit down after that and you go like, let me think about this. So I saw this happen and that happened. Probably Jose was mad. Probably, Shauna was annoyed, whatever it might be. But the deal is, if you start each of those sentences with, I wonder if Jose was mad. I wonder if Shauna was annoyed. You've just changed the way you're holding that assumption or conclusion. It's much like, instead of having to hold it really tight because it's a brick, it has to be true. I've just pried my fingers open. I'm holding it, but I'm holding it openly. I wonder if this is true. Very different perspective on it. So that's why I say we've told them to hold their breath. We're going to bring them back in now in analysis, but hold them differently. And this is it. I wonder if. The wonder makes all the difference. That enables you to take the second step, which is explore alternate possibilities. I wonder if, instead of this being true, this could be true. And we'll practice this in just a minute. And then finally, consider the impacts of these possibilities. It looks like this on the canvas. You write some wonder statements down and then you pair them up with some alternate wonders. You consider the impacts of these wonders, like, so what if these things are true? And then you're going to prioritize which are the ones that are most important for me to be concerned about, because this is what feeds into your actions, right? This just feeds naturally down into the action stage, is to say, I'm going to look at these two or these two things. These are the most important things for me to be paying attention to. So let's practice for a second. Get out your chat, get ready to chat here, because I'm going to ask you a question about it. If you were observing a team or a group of people and someone was silent the whole time you were there, maybe it was an hour-long interaction and they just didn't say a word, what do you think is the most likely reason that comes to your mind? Like, what's your first assumption? Go ahead and put that in chat. They're not engaged, okay? Maybe they aren't feeling well. Introverted, shy, nothing to say, multitasking, nothing to add. Yeah, there's something's bothering them. There's a lot of possibilities. They're observing. Good answer. Not comfortable with the topic. Don't want to be there. On mute, maybe. You're on mute. No, that's the team name. I wonder if they're just in disagreement. You can see the variety of possibilities that we've got here. And the assumption that we make about it, just based on the possibilities of this group of 20 people that we've just put into chat over the last like 15 seconds, should tell you that it's pretty much impossible to know anything for sure about that, right? All we know for sure is they were silent the whole time. I tend to default to, I assume that they're mad about something. And in full transparency, that's just because of how I grew up, right? If someone was silent in my house growing up, that meant they were ticked. So that's just like my default assumption. That must be why they're quiet. It comes from my background. It could be, like I like to say in some of my training classes, it could be that I just ate a whole pizza at lunch. I mean, I do have pizza right here. I'm not very quiet right now, but if I ate a whole pizza, at lunch, I'm probably going to be almost asleep in about 30 to 45 minutes. There's a lot of possible reasons for it. And this actually was a real scenario that was challenging for somebody, actually the gentleman that I've worked with to create that cohort that I was telling you. We are developing an insight, and he had a team member who was silent the whole time during the daily Scrum. And he assumed it was because of the conversation that took place yesterday as a team where her view just didn't prevail, basically, right? The team decided to do something that just wasn't her idea about something, and he just thought she was still upset about that. And so he, acted on that basically. And then later in the day was like, maybe I should go talk to her. And he went and talked to her and found out that her grandmother had died last night. Totally, like, you can never guess that. Nor do you want to, of course. But it's just proof that you don't want to walk into these analysis things with those assumptions. So hold them as an open possibility. Let's put it that way. Just like before, that's a good starting point. Those are like a good first step for you. Other things you can do from an analysis perspective is reflect first and arouse your curiosity. If you observed and you weren't surprised by something, try again. Now, if you are analyzing, you want to arouse your curiosity about what took place. That's what wonder does. That's why I use that wording. Look to be surprised about what's in the observations. What am I curious about, concerned about, excited about? So you could start the analysis that way as a way to kind of get your mind in that mode of curiosity. You can also identify what you don't know. So depending on just how you think and what your makeup is, that could be a way that you could arouse your curiosity, is to start with uncertainty instead of certainty. Of course, I'm always going to go for outside perspective. What would happen if you took your observations and took them to somebody who wasn't in that situation and said, what are you curious about here? Or what do you see? What do you think might be going on there? And get their perspective. You're probably going to hear some things that are not what you walked in with, and that can change the way you're looking at the situation. Again, just get you out of your kind of stuck thinking approach a little bit and see from someone else's perspective. This is a great place. We're going to start to talk about the empirical loops. Here's a great place to start talking about the impacts on shared agreements, definition of done, working agreements, Scrum framework, whatever format your team's in, and say, how are these things impacting that or have been impacted by that? If you've done this loop before, this is the time to bring back in the baseline and go, how is this different than the last time or the last 3 times that I've observed? Am I seeing a shift in something here? And as I gave you the precursor before, what's the impact of my previous actions? I've took some actions in past. Am I seeing the effect I was hoping to see out of those things? All right, let's fly through action here, because like I said, we're usually pretty good at acting. The deal is we got a bunch of tools. The problem though, where we have is selecting them. Like you go search for tools online in Agile and you'll find gobs of them. But selecting our tools, I would recommend to you to do it based off of the impact we're trying to have, which again seems obvious, and yet we don't do it. At least I will say I haven't done it. So if we've filtered in our analysis down to the most important items that we want to have an impact on, then we start out by describing the impact we want to have. It's like starting with that part of a user story, right? What's the impact I want to have? And then I can select an action that I think is going to be most effective to have that impact. And that's really what this canvas just again prompts you to do, is to what's my desired impact and then what's the action I want to take. And for those of you keeping score at home, that looks a lot like a hypothesis statement, because it is. That's right. I hypothesize by taking this action, the thing on the right here, I'll have this impact, and that's the thing on the left. And then, like I said, when you do your next awareness, you get to analysis, you can pull that back and say, am I seeing this impact that I was hoping to see? And if you've written it as a good observable impact, you'll be able to see whether or not you've had that effect. Other things you could do, well, first of all, let me just say there's a lot of actions. There's a library all over the place. Management 3.0, if you're not familiar with it, a lot of good practices there. Liberating structures, I've already mentioned, and it was put in chat. I think Doug put that in chat. Professional coaching, which I'm starting on my journey as well on that one. There's a lot of good tools in that. Powerful questions. Anyway, there's tons of libraries. Those just happen to be my 3 favorite. There's a lot of things out there that you can pick from. I just want to prompt you for a few more things. The typical Scrum Master stances of teach, mentor, and coach. Pull something from one of those. Reflect back is always an action you could consider taking to have the impact you want. Go get help or escalate. These are always possibilities that you need to make sure you at least consider. They might be best for you. And then there's always the possibility that you feel like you don't have enough information, right? It's like a Scrum team needing to do a spike. You don't want to do a spike all the time. And yet sometimes it is the best investment for you to make. And so that's always a possibility here too, that you might want to learn more by observing again, by checking your assumptions with somebody, by inquiring with somebody. So those are also always possibilities for you. Other things you could do for actions: identify how you're actually going to measure the impact. So we've talked about impact. What is the measurement? Of course, then that makes a really actually true hypothesis statement there. I believe by taking action, it will impact this, which will be observed by this measure. And then again, pulling back from the behavioral science perspective, you can consider that the environment is probably supporting the behaviors that you're seeing. So maybe consider how the environment could be shifted, or as Management 3.0 I would say, it manages the system, not the people. In closing, a few final thoughts that may not be obvious based on what we've already talked about. Start by slowing down. Maybe that was obvious from earlier, but you're gonna have to slow down to become more aware. That's just how it works. As you build that muscle, you can be faster at it. I haven't talked about this, but look for the positive. If you think about what we talked about, most of the examples we're talking about were generally would be construed as not so great things, like maybe someone's annoyed or angry or whatever, disruptive, etc. But there's positive things too. Maybe that disagreement that you're seeing is finally a sign that the team is in the storming phase from Tuckman, right? That can be a good thing. But regardless, look for positive things too, as you're looking, not just for negative things that need to be improved, but for the positive things that need to be protected and encouraged. And those are actions you can take to protect and encourage things too. And you've probably already gotten from me that I love community. So do this stuff in community. You've seen some examples in there where I say pair up with somebody, because it is so much better. Your perspective can be so much broader when you have somebody else that you're paired up with, and you can get that perspective out of where they're coming from. Oh, I was wrong. There's another ad. Okay. We develop Scrum Masters. That's obvious. Happy to talk to you about our ability to develop Scrum Masters with an empirical approach like we just talked about, and a lean approach and an agile approach to that. And a final reminder, you are welcome to get this tool. Happy to help you get that by email there, or go to the website that's listed there. Phew. Thanks for flying through the last few there with me. I know that was kind of warp speed in the last section, but